Welcome back, everybody. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about Joseph Smith and his polyandry and polygamy and how he practiced both. Now, Joseph Smith at the time looked at the Old Testament and he thought, well, if Abraham and other people in the Old Testament had multiple wives and practiced polygamy, why can't I? So the thing about these cult leaders, I'm going to show you the connection between Joseph Smith and a lot of these cult leaders you're going to see in these few clips I'm going to show you. Is they all claim to either be Jesus Christ or speak to Jesus Christ, have seen Jesus Christ. They're all saying they're the Messiah. They all use this power and manipulation in order to sleep with their followers. And they threaten people if they don't do this. So they'll tell people that they won't make it to heaven, that they will be excommunicated, and they can lose their family, their friends, and everything. So these people, they worship these cult leaders, and they have been manipulated to do so. Therefore, they do what they say. And what strikes me as odd is, why do people look at all these cult leaders of today in the modern times with all the same tactics used and the same things said, but they think Joseph Smith was right? That Jesus spoke to him in the first vision and Moroni. Why do people believe that these modern day prophets are wrong or crazy, and Joseph Smith and other people like Joseph Smith at that time are not? Like, they're telling the truth. That's the question I have. If you can look at all these modern day people and think that they're nuts, why don't you say the same thing about Joseph Smith? How is that not a wake-up call to say, wow, that is just like Joseph Smith? That sounds exactly like what he did. And then make you question everything. Did Joseph Smith really see Christ? Did he really get these new revelations and doctrines? And that's what we're going to explore today. So thank you for joining. Let's get into the first video. Okay, so the first person we're going to look at is Michael Travisser, the leader of a cult called the Lord of the Righteousness Church. Routinely has sex with wives of his followers at the New Mexico compound called Strong City. And here's a quick video of him.
But soon after we arrived, he found the time to tell me about the momentous day the spirit of Michael came into Wayne Bent.
One day, by myself, I was in my trailer, and I sat down in my chair just relaxing, and there was nothing on my mind in particular. And then God said to me, "You are Messiah." Certainly by no instruction from me, two witnesses, these two, left their homes, left their families, and it wasn't at my instruction or behest. It just occurred.
But these women aren't just devoted witnesses. Michael insists God commanded him to start having sex with both of them. He convinced their husbands, who were still in the cult, he was just following God's orders, and told them to direct their distress heavenward.
So here's a video of Alan John Miller, also known as AJ, who claims to be the reincarnation of Jesus of Nazareth, and his partner Mary Suzanne Luck, and she claims to be the reincarnation of Mary Magdalene.
I've been given exclusive access to what the media has described as one of the world's most worrying cult leaders, Alan John Miller.
Actually, I've had a 2,000-year life, and my name is Jesus as well, so I was born Jesus of Nazareth in the 1st century.
He has been compared to David Koresh, the cult leader whose followers died in a mass fire at Waco. He's been described as the face of evil, with apocalyptic predictions for the end of the world. He breaks up marriages and uses his followers for sexual favours.
A friend of mine came to me one day and he said, "I met this bloke and I reckon he's Jesus."
You know, how arrogant is that, and what a wanker.
I have read he has a compound and his followers are setting up home with him.
The Roman soldiers weren't certain as to whether I'd died or not yet, and so they actually speared the side of my body up into the heart.
Now meet a Kenyan man named Mwalimu Yeshua Tangalehe, a man who believes he's the real Jesus Christ.
Meet the real Jesus Christ, a man who speaks to God directly.
Mungu wa amani awainue na kuwabariki wote. Amina. Tuze Yesu milele na milele.
Ninaamini kabisa huyu ni Yesu, anaponya na anatenda.
He is the owner of this church, and these 12 men you see here are his disciples.
Ikizi umeuliza ni wewe yule Yesu ama ni mwingine? Ni mimi yule Yesu Kristo, ni mimi.
This man is not...
Waco Massacre cult leader David Koresh told men to be celibate, and then he went and slept with their wives. A woman who became the youngest person to join Charles Manson's cult, she was 14 years old, has described how he captivated and controlled female members of his group, and how he had sex with her after just hours of first meeting. In a graphic memoir, Diane Lake, now 64, said her first encounter with Manson, who was 33 at the time, was tender. In California, the age of consent has been 18 years old since 1913, and Manson's alleged actions amount to statutory rape. Cult leader Keith Raniere, he also had sexual encounters with a lot of his members, and he had a relationship that tore a family apart. He had a relationship with 3 sisters who joined his organizations, and the dad even still supports him. Cult leader Jim Jones had sex with male followers and women followers. Cult leader John Humphrey Noyes was a community leader, a godly title, and led young believers heavenward by introducing them to what he considered to be the holy pleasures of sex. Noyes often assigned himself 12 and 13-year-old girls. Cult leader David Berg of the Children of God cult came up with a formula for attracting more members into his cult, and they were in their late teens. And he taught that they could have sex as much as they wanted. And he would take an army of gorgeous young women, use them to recruit people with their vaginas. Female members would head out into the community as literal bait and have sex with potential new members in a practice known as flirty fishing. I can go on and on with this. There's many different cult leaders who all have used their power to have sexual intercourse with their followers, to practice polyandry and polygamy. Let's get into the meat of the video. Okay, so to kick this off, we're going to be going off of Jeremy Runnells' book, The CES Letter, on polygamy and polyandry. It starts off with a quote by Elder Marlon K. Jensen of the LDS Church. He's a historian. So the question of polyandry. Polygamy is when a man has multiple wives. Polyandry is when a man marries another man's wife. Joseph did both. And Elder Marlon K. Jensen is a executive director of the church history department, a church historian and recorder. He also holds the presidency of the 70 and as the executive director of the curriculum, historical, priesthood, and family and church history departments. He himself even said that Joseph Smith practiced both polygamy and polyandry. So to understand why Joseph Smith practiced polygamy, outside of the obvious that he just wanted to have many wives and screw whoever he wanted to, we got to look at what he created in the Doctrine and Covenants. So we're going to see what the Doctrine and Covenants and their teachings say about polygamy. In section 132 of Doctrine and Covenants, the revelation was given through Joseph Smith the prophet, and it's relating to the new and everlasting covenant, including the eternity of the marriage covenant and the principle of plural marriage. And you can see it says here, "Behold and lo, I am the Lord thy God, and will answer thee as touching this matter. Therefore, prepare thy heart to receive and obey the instructions which I am about to give unto you. For all those who have this law revealed unto them must obey the same." And it goes on to say, "For behold, I reveal unto you a new and everlasting covenant, and if ye abide not that covenant, then are ye damned. For no one can reject this covenant and be permitted to enter into my glory." So he's saying that if you do not practice polygamy, if you do not practice this new and everlasting covenant, you are damned and you are not permitted to go to heaven. And again in verse 6 he says, "Therefore must and shall abide the law, or he shall be damned, saith the Lord God." So again, the Lord God in the Doctrine and Covenants is saying that if men do not practice this, or whoever does not practice this, shall be damned. So here inside the CES letter, we have a graph that compares side by side with Joseph Smith, the prophet, and Warren Jeffs. And as you can see, in the black you have Joseph Smith, and in the blue you have Warren Jeffs. So let's start with number of wives. Joseph Smith had 34, and Warren Jeffs had 78. Age of the youngest wife. Joseph Smith's youngest was 14. Warren Jeffs was 12. Other men's wives. Joseph Smith had 11. Warren Jeffs had 21. Mother-daughter pairs. Joseph Smith had 1. Warren Jeffs had 7. Biological sister wives. Joseph Smith had 8. Warren Jeffs had 56. Under age of 18 wives, Joseph Smith had 7. Warren Jeffs had 24. So Warren Jeffs really outdid Joseph Smith. All of it is disgusting. However, he took those Doctrine and Covenants to the extreme, and he really practiced what the Doctrine and Covenants preached. He really wants to get to heaven, so he did what they said, because as we just read, it says, "Ye shall be damned if you do not follow the new and everlasting covenant." So Jeremy Runnells, the guy who wrote the CES letter, a guy who was part of the LDS Church his entire life, somebody who dedicated his life to the church, has these questions. One of the things he says inside the CES letter when talking about the polyandry and the polygamy of Joseph Smith, he says, "One of the things that also truly disturbed me in my research was discovering the real origins of polygamy and how Joseph Smith really practiced it. Joseph Smith was married to at least 34 women, as now verified in the church's 2014 polygamy essays. Polyandry, 11 of them were married women of other living men, among them being Apostle Orson Hyde, who was sent on his mission to dedicate Palestine when Joseph secretly married his wife." So he sent his friend away and then married his wife. And his wife's name was Miranda Hyde. So church historian Elder Marlon K. Jensen and an unofficial apologist like Fair Mormon, they don't even dispute the polyandry. And an update, the church admits polyandry in its October 2014 plural marriage in Kirtland and Nauvoo essay. The church and apologists now attempt to justify these polyandrous marriages by theorizing that they probably didn't include sexual relations, and thus were eternal or dynastic sealings only. How is not having sex with a living man's wife on earth, only to take her away from him in the eternities, to be one of your 40 wives, any better or any less immoral? I mean, that's a great question. How is that any better? And this is something the Muslims will do when defending the Prophet Muhammad. Muhammad had sex with his wife Aisha, who was 9 years old at the time. It says consummated the marriage, and then Muslim apologists will say, well, consummated the marriage doesn't mean they had sex. It just means that they lived together. Do you see how these people do this? They twist things and change things to make it look good. It doesn't look good. We know what it is, and you're not going to pull the wool over our eyes. So during the summer of 1841, Joseph Smith tested Helen Mar Kimball's father, Apostle Herbert C. Kimball. And he did this by asking Herbert to give his wife, Violet, Helen's mother, to Joseph. Quote, "Shortly after Herbert's return from England, he was introduced to the doctrine of plural marriage, directly through a startling test, a sacrifice that shook his very being and challenged his faith to the ultimate. He had already sacrificed homes, possessions, friends, relatives, all worldly rewards, peace, and tranquility for the restoration." And a lot of cult members do this, by the way, guys. They give up everything and they leave everything behind for their cause. Nothing was left to place on the altar, save his life, his children, and his wife. Then came the Abrahamic test. Joseph demanded for himself what to Herbert was unthinkable, his Violet. Totally crushed spiritually and emotionally, Herbert touched neither food nor water for 3 days and 3 nights, and continually sought confirmation and comfort from God. On the evening of the 3rd day, some kind of assurance came, and Herbert took Violet to the upper room of Joseph's store on Water Street. The prophet wept at the act of faith, devotion, and obedience. Joseph had never intended to take Violet. It was all a test. And this is from Herbert C. Kimball in his writings, The Mormon Patriarch and Pioneer. So if Joseph's polygamous, polyandrous marriages are innocuous dynastic sealings meant for the afterlife, as the church and apologists are now theorizing, and Joseph wanted to, quote-unquote, dynastically link himself to the Kimball family, why was the apostle Herbert C. Kimball so troubled by Joseph's command for his wife, that he, quote, touched neither food nor water for 3 days and 3 nights? Quote, out of the 34 women, 7 of them were teenage girls, as young as 14 years old. Joseph was 37 years old when he married 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball, 23 years his junior. Even by 19th century standards, this is shocking. And in an update, the church now admits that Joseph Smith married Helen Mar Kimball several months before her 15th birthday, in its October 2014 plural marriage and Kirtland and Nauvoo essay. Joseph took 14-year-old Helen Mar Kimball's hand in marriage after his disturbing Abrahamic test on her father, while promising Helen and her family eternal salvation and exaltation if she accepted. So basically saying, if you don't accept, you won't get into heaven. If you do accept, I'll bless you. You will have eternal salvation and exaltation. So Helen's talking about her mom and how conflicted she was and hurt. And she says that how cruel this seemed to the mother whose heartstrings were already stretched until they were ready to snap. For he had taken Sarah noon to wife, and she thought she had made sufficient sacrifice. But the Lord required more. Was it the Lord or was it Joseph Smith that required more? Of course it was Joseph Smith that required more. So Joseph Smith tells Helen Mar Kimball, quote, if you will take this step, it will ensure your eternal salvation and exaltation, and that of your father's household, and all of your kindred. Quote, then she says, this promise was so great that I willingly gave myself to purchase so glorious a reward. This is a very common thing that happens with cult leaders and their followers. They promise these women eternity, exaltation, salvation, tell them that they'll be blessed, and these women believe and worship these people, so of course they're going to do it. It's all part of them being indoctrinated and brainwashed. So this is Helen talking about her mom, Violet. She calls this the mother's bleeding heart. When Joseph asked her if she was willing, she replied, if Helen is willing, I have nothing more to say. She had witnessed the sufferings of others who were older and who better understood the step they were taking, and to see her child, who had scarcely seen her 15th summer, following in the same thorny path. And you see how they use the word thorny path? It's not a path you want to walk on. In her mind, she saw the misery which was sure to come, as the sun was to rise and set, but it was all hidden from me. So why all the agony and anguish? Why were these women feeling this way, disgusted and hurt and upset? Why were they feeling this if it was a dynastic linking and a sealing for the afterlife? Why did it seem cruel to Violet, whose heartstrings were already stretched? And among the women and girls was a mother-daughter set and 3 sister sets. Several of these girls included Joseph's own foster daughters, who lived and worked in the Smith home. That is disgusting. So he even married his own foster daughters. This guy was insatiable. He had no limits. And Jeremy Runnells goes on to say, if some of these marriages were non-sexual, quote-unquote dynastic, quote-unquote eternal sealings only, as theorized by the church and all the apologists who defend this, why would Joseph need to be sealed to a mother and daughter set? The mother would have been sealed to the daughter and would have become part of Joseph's afterlife family through the sealing to her mother. Because he liked it. He wanted to. It had nothing to do with God telling him this. He just used that excuse to be able to sleep with women, and it worked. So among the many issues that Jeremy Runnells had with the church, he says in his letter, I have a problem with this. This is Warren Jeff's territory. This is not the Joseph Smith I grew up learning about in the church and having a testimony of. This is not the Joseph Smith whom I sang praise to the man or taught others about for 2 years in the mission field. And he says, many members do not realize that there is a set of very specific and bizarre rules outlined in Doctrine and Covenants 132. Still in LDS canon, despite President Hinckley publicly stating that polygamy is not doctrinal, on how polygamy is to be practiced. It is a kind of revelation you would expect from the likes of Warren Jeffs to his FLDS followers. And according to the Doctrine and Covenants, this is where Joseph Smith violates his own everlasting covenant. Because the only form of polygamy permitted in D&C 132 is a union with the virgin after first giving the opportunity to the first wife to consent to the marriage. If the first wife doesn't consent, the husband is exempt and may still take an additional wife. But the first wife must at least have the opportunity to consent. In case the first wife doesn't consent, she will be destroyed. Also, the new wife must be a virgin before the marriage and be completely monogamous after the marriage, or she will be destroyed. So D&C is unequivocal on the point that polygamy is permitted only to multiply and replenish the earth, and bear the souls of men. This would be consistent with the Book of Mormon prohibition on polygamy, except in the case where God commands it to raise up seed. But Joseph Smith was doing this just to get laid, just for the flesh. He was going completely off the rails and against his own revelation and covenant in D&C. So Jeremy goes on to show you guys exactly how Joseph Smith actually practiced polygamy. Joseph married 11 women who were already married, multiple husbands, polyandry, unions without the knowledge or consent of the husband in cases of polyandry. These married women continued to live as husband and wife with their first husband after marrying Joseph. A union with Apostle Orson Hyde's wife while he was on a mission. So he sends his buddy out on a mission to spread his false gospel, his fairy tale. And while his friend's away, he marries his wife. That sounds like a real good friend. That sounds like somebody I want to follow. Not. A union with a newlywed and pregnant woman, Zena Huntington, threats that Joseph would be slain by an angel with a drawn sword if they did not enter into the union. Unions without the knowledge or consent of the first wife, Emma, including 2 teenagers who worked with Emma in the Smith home, such as the Partridge Sisters and the Lawrence girls. Promises of salvation and exaltation for the girls and or their entire families. Do you see how he made threats that, oh, God's going to strike me down with a sword, an angel's going to kill me with the sword if you don't marry me, or I promise you'll have salvation, exaltation if you do marry me, and all your family will get the VIP club card into the celestial kingdom. It's just ridiculous, and people bought into it, which is the really sad thing. And then you fast forward a couple hundred years later, and people are still buying into it. It just blows my mind. So we know Emma wasn't happy about Joseph Smith's relationship. You can clearly see that within the documents that have been recorded throughout the church history. And that's what we're going to look at right now. How did Emma feel? What did Emma say? Did she go along with it because Joseph Smith she believed was a real prophet? Or did she have doubts of herself? And did they have friction between them because of it? That's what we're going to look at right now. Emma Smith showed marked ambivalence toward her husband's secret practice of plural marriage, at times rejecting the doctrine, and at other times reluctantly accepting it. However, by July 1843, the practice had become a major source of distress between them. Emma Smith struggled with Joseph Smith's new marriages in the months leading up to July 1843, and Joseph Smith was sealed to at least 13 additional wives, most of whom were married to him without Emma's knowledge. Joseph Smith had already been sealed to the sisters 2 months earlier. Emma suggested Joseph Smith marry Maria and Sora Lawrence, ages 19 and 16 or 17, another pair of sisters who were living in the Smith household. However, Emily Partridge later testified that Emma became embittered soon after. Emma was treating Joseph Smith coldly and badly and was disposed to be revenge on him. She thought that if he would indulge himself, she would too. And who could blame her? So William McLellan reported a conversation he had with Emma Smith in 1847, which account is accepted by both LDS and non-LDS historians, describing how Emma discovered her husband's affair with Fanny Alger. And quote, "One night she, Emma, missed Joseph and Fanny Alger. She went to the barn and saw him and Fanny in the barn together, alone. She looked through a crack and saw the transaction. She told me this story was too verily true." So Joseph's polygamy also included dishonesty in public sermons, denials by Joseph Smith that he never practiced polygamy, and the Nauvoo expositor that exposed his polygamy and the destruction of the printing press initiated the chain of events that led to Joseph's death, eventually. An illegal marriage to Fanny Alger, which was described by Oliver Cowdery as a, quote, dirty, nasty, filthy affair, quote. LDS polygamy apologists further discuss Emma's disturbing discovery in the aftermath here. Joseph was practicing polygamy before the sealing authority was given. LDS historian Richard Bushman states, there is evidence that Joseph was a polygamist by 1835. So Joseph's marriage to Fanny Alger in 1833 was illegal under both the laws of the land and under any theory of divine authority. It was plainly adultery. It was adultery. In an attempt to influence and abate public rumors of his secret polygamy, Joseph asked 31 witnesses to sign an affidavit published in the LDS October 1st, 1842 Times and Seasons, stating that Joseph did not practice polygamy. Pointing to the above-mentioned D&C 101 verse 4 scripture, these witnesses claim the following, quote, we know of no other rule or system of marriage than the one published from the Book of the Doctrine and Covenants, quote. Now, the problem with this affidavit is that it was signed by several people who were secret polygamists themselves, or who knew that Joseph was a polygamist at the time they signed the affidavit. In fact, Eliza R. Snow, one of the signers of this affidavit, was Joseph Smith's plural wife. Joseph and Eliza had been married 3 months earlier on June 29, 1842. Two apostles and future prophets, John Taylor and Wilford Woodruff, were also aware of Joseph's polygamy behind the scenes when they signed the affidavit. Another signer, Bishop Whitney, had personally married his daughter Sarah Ann Whitney to Joseph as a plural wife with a few months earlier on July 27, 1842. Whitney's wife and Sarah's mother Elizabeth, also a signer, witnessed the ceremony. So he basically got all his friends and people who would cover up for him to write off saying that he's not doing anything wrong. It's ridiculous. But what does it say about Joseph Smith and his character, right? And this is a great statement that Jeremy Runnells, puts in here. It says a lot about a person's character. All these lies and deceits and cover-ups. It's not good. And he goes on to say, to include his plural wife and associates who knew about his secret polygamy, polyandry, to lie and to perjure in a sworn public affidavit that Joseph was not a polygamist. And then he says, now does the fact that Joseph Smith practiced polygamy and polyandry while denying and lying to Emma, the saints, and the world over the course of 10 plus years of his life prove that he was a false prophet? No. That the church is false? No, it doesn't. But what it does prove, however, is that Joseph Smith's pattern of behavior and his lies and his deceits and his cover-ups for a period of at least 10 years of his adult life was to keep secrets and to be deceptive and to be dishonest, both privately and publicly. And so when you take this snapshot of Joseph's character and you start looking into the Book of Abraham, the Kinderhook plates, the Book of Mormon, all these things that he lied about and falsified and made up, the multiple First Vision accounts, priesthood restoration, and so on, that you begin to see a very disturbing pattern and picture. A very bad picture of this person who's supposedly a prophet, somebody that we're supposed to look up to and follow. It just looks bad. It's bad. And just like I always say, I'm always saying that Warren Jeffs follows the Book of Mormon more closely than actual modern-day Latter-day Saints. And in the book, even Jeremy Runnells agrees. He says, today Warren Jeffs is more closely aligned to Joseph Smith's Mormonism than the modern LDS church is. So I think Jeremy Runnells really hit the nail on the head with that one. And Jeremy Runnells went as far as putting Joseph Smith's polygamy and polyandry family tree, so to speak, in the book as well. And I took some screenshots and I'll show you, but you could always go to the cesletter.org and you can see all this for yourself. But I'm going to leave these diagrams up here just for a moment so you guys kind of take a look at it on the video. But I really suggest you guys go to cesletter.org and check out a lot of the information that I'm putting out in here, because a lot of it does come from Jeremy Runnells' book. It's a great book. It points out everything that I've learned along my journey of learning Mormonism, and he puts it smack dab in this book. It's a great book, so I highly suggest that you go to csletter.org and look at all this for yourself. So thank you guys again for joining. I hope you enjoyed the video. I'm going to be making another one soon. However, please do your research. Look at lds.org. Go to the cesletter.org and check all these sources. I posted the sources and links in the videos, so you can go check those out as well and do your own research. Again, thank you, and I will see you next time.